Hi, my name's Jacob Swinney. I'm a certified arborist with the Western chapter of the ISA. I work for Billmar Landscape, and today we're going to be going over crown rot, what it does to the tree, why it affects it, and things that you can do to improve the situation. I'm going to show you guys several different occurrences where crown rot happens. Essentially, one can be buried too deep, causing the soil around the bark to always keep the crown saturated. Another, emitters can be directly on the tree, or a tree can be planted in turf, and it'll be the wrong tree for turf, and again, the bark is always saturated, and it causes the problem. One thing to know is that the bark of the tree is essentially the cardiovascular system of the tree. As soon as it's saturated and it becomes a rot, the veins are basically cut off to the tree, and no longer are nutrients being transported from the roots to the canopy. Back in this corner of the property, we have 3 separate African sumacs. Each one of them are planted in turf. One's dead, one's not doing so well, and the other one's halfway alright, I would say. In my opinion, African sumacs should not be planted in turf because they do not do well with constant sprinkler heads getting sprayed upon the trunk. Again, this causes the rot within the bark, and here's what starts to happen after a long time. This bark will continue to keep on getting wet and saturated and saturated. It's going to cause to look like this. It easily flakes off. It's very wet and moldy, if you will. See how easy it peels back here. Now this discoloration on the underneath the bark, that's a sheer sign of crown rot. This tree was hit with crown rot very hard. It even looks like it's might be buried too deep. You see that it goes straight into the ground. You don't necessarily see the flare of the trunk here. I kind of want to say that this crown is buried. Again, as we get closer to the bottom here, you can just see how dark the trunk is. This is all crown rot right here. And again, it's preventing any nutrients from going to the top of this tree. So what happened? This tree over the years has constantly been sprayed with turf irrigation. They did try to dig a hole or a tree well around it to prevent some of the water from touching the crown. However, it didn't help it. They didn't adjust the sprinkler heads to prevent them from touching the tree itself or spraying upon the bark of the tree. And again, African sumacs, they just don't take that very well, and this one got hit really hard with crown rot and ended up dying out, as you can see. This tree needs to be removed. This tree is doing a little bit better than the one that we were just looking at. However, it does not look great. You see that there's many dead tips on it, and there is a discoloration, a light green in the leaves, which tells me that there's not getting nutrients or proper nutrients to the canopy of the tree. As we get closer, we can start to see that there is bark damage. More than likely, this bark damage is from being saturated, and either a kid came over and peeled it off, or somebody kicked it, or it may have even just flaked off. Down here at the bottom, you can see where this wore off already. This right here is kind of a crown rot. Look how easy this bark flakes. Underneath it, you can just see the dark color. This is all crown rot right here. So again, this part of the bark is completely ruined, and no nutrients are going from the roots through at least that section into the canopy. As we make our way around here, you see that there is a slight flare here. So I don't think that it's buried too deep. I think that the problem here is that it's planted in turf. A tree well was made around it. However, again, the sprinklers were never adjusted to spray away from the tree, so it's constantly being saturated. We can see that there is some small discoloration around the base here. Some more crown rot is pretty obvious. All of this bark here is actually moldy, kind of. I've never seen this, but it's saturated. You see how easy it flakes off. This is all very bad. Again, I think sumacs are one of the worst trees to ever plant in this valley in turf. Their bark just does not take turf very well. It's a great tree. I love the tree for the valley. It does well in our heats, and It does decent in our winters, but not in turf. Doesn't look good. It just starts to look like a very Charlie Brown-like tree. Now this tree, again, it's an African sumac. Has a little bit better of a canopy, but I wouldn't say it's the best looking canopy that I've ever seen on a sumac. As we get closer, you can still see how sparse it is in here. I think that if it was a healthy tree, it'd be much thicker. We get to looking at the base. We have a lot of air roots, which isn't always the best thing, but it's not necessarily the worst either. I would like to see the dirt covered up until, again, where the roots meet the bark of the tree or the trunk of the tree. This here, this line is the crown. That's where the soil level should be. We have a girdling root. You see that root's spinning around it. And look at all this. This is all bark damage from being saturated. I could almost peel this stuff off here. Look at that. I can just peel it off. You can see just how easy all this bark comes off. This is all rotted right here. I can almost put my finger into it. Again, it's all flaked right here. You can see here it's actually starting to flake up. One problem that this causes, it does allow insects to get into the bark of the tree, into the trunk. Borer beetles, they love to have an easy access. You can just see the rot on that. Look at the color difference. All this dark, this is all rot here. So this tree may not be showing too much signs in the canopy of the tree yet. However, I assume that if the turf spray heads are not fixed to where they don't spray on that tree anymore, this tree is going to decline just like that one is, and just like that one's already done. Alright, here's an African sumac that's in a xeriscaped area. It's not planted in turf. It looks pretty healthy from just kind of looking at it, but if we zoom in on it, you can see there that there are some dead tips on it. Now, why are there dead tips? Why does an African sumac have dead tips in the Vegas Valley? It should be a very healthy tree, especially if it's not planted in turf, but let's find out what's going on with this tree. As soon as I walk up to it, I notice a problem. It's a slow decline on this tree, but the reason is this tree doesn't have emitters, and that's not necessarily the problem, but it does have a large bubbler. This entire area used to be a turf, and they xeriscaped the outside and only kept the turf on the inside. Very common in the Vegas Valley to not remove all the turf, but some of it. Now this bubbler head was left right at the base of the tree. I don't necessarily see any wet rings here, but as I get directly next to it, if I dig down, I can see here that there's a discoloration between the dry bark here and the wet bark here, which is directly next to the sprinkler head. So this wet bark is causing a little bit of a crown rot. I can actually peel it back. I can feel like how malleable the bark is, and it shouldn't be like that. And yeah, this is all crown rot. Eventually, if this isn't moved back, I assume that a large patch of bark sooner or later will rip off right here, just as we've seen on those other trees. This bark will fall off. A large section of this tree will die. And if it's not fixed within, who knows, several years, it may take a very long time, then this tree will slowly decline and die as the other ones had. Now, the only way to fix crown rot, there's no soil drench or anything like that for this kind of rot. The best way to fix it is to return the conditions to desirable. Now what that means is remove any excess dirt that's around the base of the tree so that it's not buried too deep. Pull back any emitters or bubblers in this case so that they're not directly on the trunk of the tree. All the feeder roots of the tree are actually towards the outside of the canopy here. They're not necessarily right there. Those are more structural roots that are around the base of the tree. So it doesn't need the water right there anyways. It needs it out here where the feeder roots are, towards the end of the canopy. So if you move the water back, take it off the base of the tree, make sure that's not buried too deep. Or in case of turf, make a large tree well, possibly fill the tree well with bark mulch, and then redesign your turf irrigation so that any of the spray heads that were previously spraying on the trees are no longer spraying on the trees, and they spray around the tree, if you will. That's my video on crown rot. I hope you guys took some knowledge from it and you guys can help to improve our industry as a whole and stop making simple mistakes like burying trees too deep or planting the wrong tree in turf, and overall just keeping an eye out for crown rot and how easy it is to fix it. If you guys have any questions, please contact Bill Maher's office, 702-596-1601. Thank you.